Womanjeka! Let's transform eco-anxiety to action. Series 3 of the Two Bays podcast is a collaboration between Regeneration Projects, UN Youth Australia and RMIT University. We acknowledge the two Great Bays, Port Phillip and Western Port, which are known to Melbourne's First Peoples as Narrm and Wurundjeri or Murrumbik. So we show deep respect to First Nations elders across Australia, past and present, who for over 60,000 years have cared for country with rich ecological knowledge. Their leadership reminds us of our own responsibility as a B Corp and actor in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. You're about to meet three amazing young Australians. In this first episode in our new series, they're setting the scene on the connection between youth mental health and climate change. Vasil Samarjiev was born in Bulgaria and now calls Tarntanya, Adelaide, home. He's the Chief Youth Representation Officer at UN Youth Australia. Charlotte Gallace lives on Wurundjeri land and is a student at Prahran High School in Narrm, Melbourne. She's an organiser with Schools Strike for Climate. When he's not at home on Millowl, Phillip Island, Joey Thompson's voice can be heard stopping traffic in Melbourne CBD. He's also an organiser with Schools Strike for Climate. In a nutshell, the youth mental health crisis is super serious and climate change is a big trigger. But surrounding yourself with good people is a great starting point for positive action. Youth leaders and organisations have a message that decision makers really need to hear. Womanjeka, Vasil, great to be finally here. How does it feel to be kickstarting this campaign about transforming eco-anxiety to action?
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for creating this space for us and for youth voices to really be heard. I'm genuinely very excited to be here and to be in a space, not just with you, Matt, but with some amazing young advocates and activists for youth voices. So yeah, this is very exciting.
Womanjeka, Charlotte, how did you get involved in the beginning with Schools Strike for Climate?
That's actually a really good question because I have a really funny story on this one that I have told at a lot of rallies.
Go for
I have
it.
a great story on this one. So I was just attending a Schools Strike for Climate rally. I've always been super passionate about the environment and about our climate. And I must have been yelling really, really loudly because it was one of my Joey or Josie or someone, a Schools Strike for Climate, just walked up to me and handed me a megaphone and a yellow jacket. And then from then on, I was kind of just there.
Wow.
They got me all set up. But yeah, I was at a rally just attending as a student and they passed me a megaphone and said, start yelling.
There you go. Well, speaking of megaphones, Joey, when you're holding a megaphone in the middle of a climate strike and you're looking around at everyone's faces, how do you keep yourself grounded? What's going through your head?
Oh man, keeping myself grounded. I think in those moments, it's just like crazy, so hectic, but it feels so empowering to be out there taking action. Like you are on the streets, you are demanding change. I guess that megaphone is kind of just like access to it. You are loud, you are out there, you are disrupting, and you are fighting for your future. And I think that grounds you, that feeling, and like knowing that you have purpose being here and you are making change.
You know, the Kulin phrase, Womanjeka, it means welcome, but also come with purpose, doesn't it? And
yes.
So I hear you. Like, you know, you're arriving, you're landing in the space, you're holding the megaphone, and you know, just today I was up at Flagstaff Gardens. I went up to the Moreton Bay Fig, which is I think one of your recent climate strikes, and it's a little bit of a contrast because there was a lady there who was doing Tai Chi, and I was like, yeah, it's a little bit of a different vibe since the last time I was here.
More chill.
But but the way that you set that up, and you know, we walked, you know, following you, and I remember we got to one of the intersections and everyone just sat down in the space and there were buses lined up. It was a pretty hot day, but I remember there was one of the volunteers supporting you, and it's a guy that I have known through work, and there was this, one of the things that struck me was this adult older gentleman and you could tell that he was out of his comfort zone by being there, and he was saying to one of the support volunteer people, saying, we shouldn't be doing this, and the volunteer person was just so straight. He said, mate, it's about the kids, it's about giving them the space. And everyone just sat there, and you just held the space, and guided us through the city. But I think that was such a powerful thing of someone being uncomfortable, but just saying, hey, we're going ahead, we're doing this anyway, this is what this is all about. Joey, we really wanted to start this series at the front line of youth climate action here in Australia, and School Strike for Climate is doing an incredible job. Can you tell us a little bit about how it started, and also how you got involved?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on how it started. I'm fairly new to School Strike. I joined in 2022. But I know School Strike has its roots in grassroots youth activism led by high school students, for high school students, and it's just to be an accessible space for high school students to organize with each other and learn skills and build connections. I think that's the core of School Strike, and obviously fighting for climate justice. But that's what sets us apart from every other group. It's actually really embarrassing. When you say, how did I get involved? I couldn't tell you the specific moment that I got involved with School Strike, but I remember I got an email one day, and it was before the 2022 election, and they said in the email, we need as many people as we can to organize election actions, campaigning for climate justice before the election. And 15-year-old me or 14-year-old me must have, for some reason, which I could not tell you why today, I decided that, I would do that. I'd never had any experience in activism before. I'd never actually even been to a school strike. But I decided to sign up, and we did an action on Phillip Island, and we had, I think, over like 70, 80 people, and it was so empowering. That feeling of being able to organize within my community and see us actually making change, like being out there publicly, getting in the newspaper. We were on the front page in the local paper, and it just felt so incredible. And then, the amount of people who voted for like climate-friendly parties like skyrocketed that election. And I've got to think that surely we played a part in that, our local activism. And ever since then, that feeling hooked me. I'm like, we can do this. We are powerful. High school students are here to make the change. And then I kept doing it, kept pursuing it. Now I'm here.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Those ripple effects are clear and tangible. I mean, even a place like Millowl, Phillip Island, we've done some work there more in the tourism space, and there's a bit of a culture there around that connection to nature and the environment, and I think that influences the way people see the world. But to use your voice like you did, no doubt it shifted the dial, and also, thinking about the movement more generally across the world, there's a lot going on, and I think a lot of these issues, a lot of us feel that they're very connected. Charlotte, when you, just as a young Australians, what do you think's in the mind of young Australians right now, like around climate change, but also other issues that are really super important?
Yeah, of course. I think, oh my gosh, there's so much on the minds of young Australians right now. I mean, we've got so much going on around us. I think, climate anxiety is a really big thing right now that a lot of young Australians are struggling with. Just that feeling of hopelessness and despair. And that was one of the main things that made me get into School Strike, was a way to deal with that feeling and a way to put that feeling, as you said, put that feeling into action. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you, for each of you, have you found that being, active, having that voice, getting that feedback, it's kind of given you a greater sense of hope and optimism, maybe, some sobering moments at times, but also on the whole, it's just it feels like we're moving?
Yeah, absolutely. And surrounding myself with such educated and incredible people like Joey and my other friends at School Strike for Climate has been just so uplifting. And knowing these people around me are making such incredible change and doing such incredible things has been really comforting.
Yeah. What's your take, Joey? Does it give you a bit brighter sense of the future, or is it's still like that tension of knowing the seriousness of the things that we're grappling with as well?
Yeah, I think I would have gone crazy a long time ago if I didn't, I guess, have an outlet to try and make change and do everything we can about this, because if we be real, it's so depressing, and disheartening the climate crisis and like the situation we're in right now in the world. Like it's not an easy place to be for a lot of young people. Um, and I think action is the best way to combat that. There's a quote that they use in Extinction Rebellion, which I refer to all the time, which is the best remedy for despair is action. I think the best way to lift yourself out of any like dark place you're in because of this crisis is to take action against it and be doing what you can to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, super well said. And look, for me personally, going back to the 2019 climate strikes, that was a massive catalyst for me personally. Just as an example, on that day we had 100,000 people across the city that were walking through, and I remember standing up before when we were in the Treasury Gardens and to take a photo behind me. And I put up my phone and brought it down to have a look at the photo, and I was just shocked. It actually made me feel like flatter than what I was feeling, because I just saw a lot of young people that were just angry, frustrated, anxious, and angry as well. And I've got 11 nephews and nieces, ranging from 8 to 23, I think now, and I just was looking at their faces and I thought it was just like them, but it just felt uncomfortable. So for me, I ended up quitting my job. I flew across to California to meet the head of environmental initiatives at Patagonia. You're wearing a Patagonia hat right now. I met a guy called Rick Ridgway. He was the head of environmental initiatives at the time, and to be honest, it was a little bit like meeting Yoda. I was there, and I was working, in a great company, but just feeling like there was more I could do. And so I was like this kind of young student, young person looking for answers. And this guy sat down with me for 2 hours, and he just put up the mirror and did the whole Yoda thing. And it's like, yeah, you've got to work it out for yourself, But he did plant a seed, and the seed was to start a consultancy that could work with people that were ready to take those steps, let's say, beyond sustainability, not just doing less harm, but create positive impacts. And since then, we've become a certified B Corp, an actor in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, participated in different climate strikes, and just tried to, in every way that we possibly can to contribute towards the next generation of leaders coming through with with that awareness of we call it transforming eco-anxiety to action. That's the essence of it. But not everyone's ready to quit their job,
Yeah.
But it's amazing when you do step out of your comfort zone, what's possible. And it sounds like for each of you, those little moments where he's like, can't really describe it, but something happened and a door opened. Vasil, I'm really curious to come across to you. UN Youth Australia publishes an annual report, and you've said how climate anxiety has kept on coming up. And we're going to hear more about some of the stats and the research in the next episode. But you've been travelling around the country relatively recently. What are you hearing about climate anxiety? How is that showing up? How is that different in rural areas and remote areas as opposed to some of the cities as well that you've been in?
Definitely, and I echo some of the statements that were made by some of the young people in the room. I think all young people continue to be extremely frustrated with the way that climate is talked about, discussed, and also acted upon in the political sphere and in policy making in Australia and globally. We are put in a unique position in UN Youth Australia because for the past 25 years, one of our initiatives has been working with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to provide a youth voice to the United Nations. So every year we get to present the youth statement on behalf of young Australians as part of the youth delegate program at the Social Development Committee in New York in the UN headquarters. And what that has allowed us to do is for the past 25 years to reach young people across the country. We found it very important to not only share the voice of the young person who goes to New York, but also to the voice of as many young people as possible across Australia. And what that has allowed us is for the past 25 years, to compile albeit brief, but a picture of what young people feel, and how young people see the world. And climate change has been coming up time and time again. It is in a very negative context. I look at our report from last year and I look at some of the quotes, and a young person from South Australia said, for example, that if change doesn't happen soon, they're scared that there won't be future for young people in Australia. There was a young person from WA that said that we have very little time before more changes are irreversible. And that tells us, as a body that sends people to the UN, but also is supposed to represent UN values and what the UN stands for, this tells us not only that young people do not trust action in climate change at the moment, but they also do not trust the ability of systems, both domestically and internationally, to be able to find a way out of this crisis, essentially. At the UN, we continue to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, and this unified vision of a way forward. This year we'll have a Summit of the Future, which is happening next month, which is a 2-day summit where all leaders across the world are coming together to try to find a way for a sustainable future and a future for all. And we continue to have these higher end goals, but the important thing about these international institutions is the trust, particularly that young people have within those institutions, in order for them to actually make a difference. And what we are noticing, especially over the last few years, is that trust has been eroding. And that is particularly worrying for us. And that's something that we take as very serious.
Yeah, I think what's powerful about what we're hearing in this conversation is we're talking about that space between, the grassroots and up into some of these, international institutions like the United Nations. But I think the point that you make around distrust is a really important one. And, you talked also about young people, trying to establish themselves and finding ways, and in doing so, creating their own institutions. And I think School Strike for Climate is an awesome example of that. UN Youth Australia is also another example for that. Something that comes to mind as we're talking here, Joey and Charlotte, we actually met at a recent screening of Future Council by Damon Gameau. And, the premise of that is, these group of young people go on a bus road trip on a biofueled bus.
Yeah.
I think like a yellow bus that runs on like vegetable oil or something.
You got it. Thanks for covering on that. So they're on a bus, they're traveling through Europe, but then they stop off at a couple of points and they meet some interesting decision makers. And the idea is that these young people essentially become advisors to leaders in established institutions. I think it was one of the banks and also a confectionery company. What was your reflection on that film, and just more broadly in the room here? Firstly, what do you think about that idea of young people actually getting more voice as advisors, guiding strategic decision making in government, in business, across different levels of society?
Yeah, I think it's so important. I mean, we're the ones that are going to be here, and we're the ones that are going to have to be able to see the consequences of this. And it's so important to have young people at the core of everything, especially when we're like making big decisions about the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think young people deserve to have a seat at the table. I think everyone does. But right now, I think youth voices are extremely left out, especially, I know, coming from a regional area, like regional voices, like more work needs to be done to make sure that they are definitely getting an equal seat at the table, if not, more than other demographics, because this issue affects us more than other people.
Just on that aspect of the the rural and remote connections, I grew up in Gippsland, in a place called Warrigal, Gunai Kurnai country, and I hear you on that. And sometimes access to knowledge and access to movements like this can be a little bit lesser. Like, what's your take? What do you notice in the differences between actors, young actors in rural as opposed to more urban areas?
Yeah, I think it's just so much less accessible to be involved in politics in any way. Like, it takes a lot more effort to do a community organizing campaign locally where one doesn't already exist, just because there's not those existing connections and relationships. When you're in the city, you have so many people. You have so many people you can just build a movement with. A lot of places already exist, but locally it's a lot harder. And I think there needs to be like a deliberate and intentional effort to make sure that younger students in regional areas are able to be involved in discussions about what our future is going to look like in terms of the climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going to throw this out there. We are putting as a very ambitious goal, but we're going to give it a crack, that we can get a senior decision maker in the Australian government into the last episode of this podcast. And there's no more senior decision maker than the Prime Minister. So I'm going to put this question to the three of you. If you wanted to invite the Minister into a conversation about climate action, and in particular this connection around transforming eco-anxiety to action, what would you say?
I tell if it was Anthony Albanese, I'd ask him what his younger self would do, because young Albanese, I can't remember what year it was, but young Albanese campaigned for a climate trigger when he was in Parliament, when he was new to Parliament. Now he's the Prime Minister. He's a senior decision maker within Parliament. He has the power to do this, but he's backed off of his previous ambitions. And I want to know why. And I want to ask him, what would you do if you were a young person right now? How would you feel, and what would you do? And I'd only hope that he would, enforce the climate trigger, because that's what we need to get us out of this crisis, is strong action from politicians like Albo, instead of being a coward and backing down on your previous ambitions.
To get us over the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, to reconnect with that. I think that's super power to reconnect with those earlier intentions. Charlotte, how would you pitch it?
Yeah, I would say when you're making all these big decisions, who really do you have at mind? Are you thinking about us, the young people who you're supposed to be protecting and thinking about? Or is it your billionaire, CEO, fossil fuel company friends?
Yeah. Vasil, let's bring you into this conversation. What would be your message, your invitation to welcome the Prime Minister into a dialogue?
I think I echo some of the statements that were made by our friends in the School Strike for Climate. I think young people's greatest weapon is numbers and unity. We actually this year have talked to about 2,000 young people across the country, to which we have actually posed the same question. If you could write one letter to the Prime Minister, what would you write in it? And we actually now have about 2,000 letters from across the country with young people's thoughts, feelings, and perspectives and solutions to some of the problems that the Prime Minister would have to solve. And so I think the biggest message that we can send is one of 2,000 young people's thoughts in a book, pretty much outlining what they really feel, and posing that accountability question of how can you be accountable to these 2,000 young people who have taken the time to write to you, to share their perspectives with you. What would be the next step for you in ensuring that these 2,000 young people feel heard? Because once you pose a question that has been asked by 2,000 people, it is very difficult to ignore.
I'm just thinking 2,000. Now let's add that to your Instagram or your social media following. What can we get that up to?
Ooh.
Roughly, what's your following at the moment? Ballpark.
On our old account.
Well, but the School Strike for Climate one itself, I couldn't tell you, but there's definitely multiple thousands.
More thousands, yeah?
Maybe even 10. Oh, I don't want to say something that's not real, but thousands and thousands for sure.
We can check this.
We can check this,
Let's just do a quick check here, because we are talking about, I think, the power in numbers. That message there is, really telling. Vasil. So let's just do a quick check. Bear with us as we get this up here, folks.
We have a couple accounts. We have pretty much an account for every section, for every city. So.
Oh yeah, only 40,000 followers.
Nothing,
So we can
really.
add that. We can turn that into, well, you know, there's 42,000 people, but absolutely the power of young people rallying together. And I think what each of your organisations are showing is that the power of listening, the power of presenting those communications, and in particular this issue around climate anxiety is something that we need to elevate.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something you mentioned earlier with the way that young people are feeling right now. And that feeling is a big reason of why we do these strikes, other than to hold the people in power accountable and to demand change, is to create an outlet for that fear and that anger and really that betrayal that young people are feeling right now by the people in power.
Yeah, and that you feel like the strikes and that platform are a way of releasing that, but it's in a safe environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, super important. And we need more spaces like that. You know, we've been running fire circles and doing different things and allowing intergenerational exchange those ways. But, you know, Vasil, just to go back very briefly, and I'm going to pass to each of you for a closing reflection or a call to action to think about fellow young people that are out there and they're wondering about how to get involved. Like they're you when you were starting out and they weren't, they're not sure, but they've got this feeling that they want to do something with. Vasil, I think it was back in May actually that I got up on a Saturday morning and I was looking through news articles online and I came across this piece on youth mental health crisis. And the irony was that I was actually standing at Peace Garden near where we live in Kensington. And I remember just being like, right, this is just not good. How are we 5 years after, or almost 5 years after the 2019 climate strikes, and we're still having this conversation? It just doesn't feel right. So I, penned an email very roughly, and I sent one to you. I sent one to, I don't think it was the Prime Minister, but it was one of the senior ministers, perhaps for climate or environment. And you came back. And so I just want to say, as we set off on this journey of the podcast series, thank you for taking that up. And really grateful to be kind of setting off on this series where we'll be exploring not just the issues, but also solutions of people that are putting, this into practice. But the key is that we want to put forward some clear recommendations that will also be part of an article that we're creating in this campaign. And we certainly welcome you guys to get involved in that as well. Alrighty, let's do a final round as we start to think about, guiding other young people that might be grappling with eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, or just looking generally to get involved. What would be your key tip? Charlotte, do you want to go first?
Yeah, start talking to people. Talk to people about your interests. Talk to people about what you want to demand. Talk to people about your hopes and stuff. Talk about how you're feeling. Start talking to people, and it's just going to lead you places. I mean, we got here by talking to you. Just have a look around, attend rallies, and yeah.
Get involved. Joey?
Yeah, second that. Absolutely, just talk to people, and also do stuff, but reach out to the groups that already exist in your area. If you look, the climate movement is big, and I can almost guarantee you that unless you live somewhere really remote, you're going to have, a group where you are. There's school strike groups all around the place, and if you don't, then, school strike exists to support young people in areas, especially regional areas where, we don't have existing connections. That's actually one of my favorite things to do at school strike, is support students establishing groups and getting involved. And sometimes you think, oh, how is my little action on Phillip Island in the middle of nowhere in Victoria going to do anything? But it does. Lots of people come to these actions, get inspired, and then become leaders. And you are so powerful by taking action in your local community. So find the school strike website, sign up for emails, sign up on the sign up form, and I'll give you a call at some point. We would love to organize with you. But yeah, just send it. Go do something.
Awesome.
You'll never go wrong by doing something about this.
We're here and we're loud.
Yeah, you sure are. Absolutely. Yeah, well, your voice is still echoing from that last climate strike you did through the CBD. But still, what's your tip? What's your go-to for young people that are looking for paths of action?
I think the starting point, and something that a lot of young people tend to lose once they get involved in some of these circles, especially some of the higher up circles that are the ones that are able to make the change, is losing their own unique experience. And I think that's would be, if a young person doesn't take anything else from this podcast, it would be to be in tune with your own unique experience. As we'll discuss further, climate anxiety and climate change is not an issue that exists in a silo, but actually affects every fiber of your existence, essentially. So being in tune with how it affects you is really important, because the next step would be to just voice your experience. The best policy is made when different experiences are taken into account. So being able to voice your own experience is the most important way for policy to be made that is conscious of that experience. And as everyone else has mentioned already, get involved, chat to everyone, chat to people that are older than you, chat to people that are younger than you, and chat without a bias, and seek to understand if there is disagreement, why there's the disagreement. Is it because your unique experience clashes with someone else's unique experience, or is it because of some other underlying factors? These are some really important things that have allowed me this voice and this privilege to speak here, but will also allow you to reach some places that might seem unreachable at the moment.
Thank you so much, Vasil from UN Youth Australia, Joey and Charlotte from School Strike for Climate. You guys are super inspiring. You're really leading the way, and we hope that in some small way we can elevate your voices through the 2Bays podcast here. Folks, if you're listening and just mindful that sometimes, even conversations like this can be triggering, please do reach out, whether that's to a family member, a friend, or whether, you need extra support. There's all kinds of systems there across our society, whether it's Lifeline, whether it's Beyond Blue, there's all kinds of different things. But yeah, don't be shy in just checking in if you do need to do that. Also, another one, we are inspired by School Strike for Climate. We'll spend an hour, which we call Regen Fridays, picking up litter along our local waterways, whether that's the Maribyrnong, whether it's the Birrarung, whether it's down on the island. I think we've done it once or twice down there as well when we've been working, or in other places. But spending that time, we spent a lot of time listening to First Nations elders, and that about power of listening to country and really slowing down. And it can be a really grounding practice as well. So folks, we're going to wrap up there. This has been the first episode, but this is just starting a journey. And Prime Minister Albanese, if you're listening, or people around you are listening, look out, because we'd love to have you on the final episode so that we can talk through some recommendations and get these voices heard and elevated in our community. Thanks, guys. Nungujin. This 2Bay series, Transforming Eco-Anxiety to Action, is part of Regeneration Project's ongoing work in building young Australians' ecological literacy, leadership and entrepreneurship skills. If you're an educator, employer, decision maker, or a young person passionate about positive change, go to our new website, 2bays.earth, to discover our new app, educational workshops and capacity building programs. Folks, that's a wrap. Thanks to our series partners, UN Youth Australia and RMIT University, special guests researching, advocating and innovating solutions, and listeners. Remember, subscribe to 2Bays on your favourite podcast platform and Instagram. My name is Matt, and on behalf of Regeneration Projects, Nungojin. Thank you for tuning in, and see you on the next episode of the 2Bays podcast.